Hey guys, I hope you're well. You are joining me back on the Talkwoods. It's me, your host, Nat Rich. And this evening, this is a surprise one for me. I knew I was going to do toxic masculinity, but I'm actually with two brand new people that I've never met before, with Oren and Matt beneath. And then I've had Sasha, is this your second show, Sasha? This is, isn't it? Yeah, second one. Yeah. So this is going to be an awkward talk around toxic masculinity. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this was because I have a lot of experience in this area, being a feisty woman growing up. I think I've annoyed quite a few guys. I've seen quite a lot of toxic masculinity, and I've also grown up in many different areas. So I've seen a lot of different arrangements of guys in the different ways that they grow up and how they handle things. But before we go into anything, I wanted to just be very clear with people, just to let you say that as far as I'm aware, and I might have this wrong, but I think I've got it right, toxic masculinity isn't something that's a biological trait of a man. This is usually adopted behaviors, and these are, from different various traumas in the past, from cultural definitions. There's a whole different reason why we have toxic masculinity, and we're going to talk about it in a wide range. So this is not to blame any men. We're here to help you in any way that we can. And if anybody's got any questions, please drop them in the comments. Be polite, and I will respond. And if there's something you want to ask one of the people that are currently on the show that you don't want to do it while in the comments, then you can reach out to me afterwards and I can pass the messages on for you. But I think we'll be able to handle decent conversations. And for those of you who aren't watching this live, that will watch it afterwards from any of the partners that we have, please do reach out. Use me as your person to reach out to rather than your college or to your company. So it's nat@iamsoundacademy.com. You can message me there for any questions. So we are going to get straight into it. So I'm joined. So we've got Sasha first. I'll have a quick chat with Sasha before we do the introductions. Welcome for a second time. Thank you so much for bringing on your friends, because you've just saved the game.
Yeah, thank you for having me and having us. I'm very excited actually to be here, especially also in this combination, because I know these guys and they're very important to me. So I'm sure we have a great conversation.
Good. Good. They look like nice guys. We've been speaking for about 6 or 7 minutes behind the scenes, and there's nothing gone wrong yet. So I think we're in good. I think we're in a good space, and they're all on the same kind of path, which is
they can be nice. Let's put it that way.
They can be. So you've got fulfilled man. Is it fulfilled men or fulfilled man?
Fulfilled man. Yeah. Yes. Fulfilled.man is the website. Yeah.
But, do you want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Fulfilled Man is I would call it, right now it's a project that I started during the last year, where I focus around that topic that we have today, in a way that at some point in the last years, and I think we'll maybe come to that point during the conversation also, I realized that there's something wrong, or there's something going on here when it comes to man and being a man. And I realized in different, first of all, more or less coincidental spaces I found myself in, that when a group of men is coming together and there's room and space for vulnerability, then something very powerful is created. I don't really have words for it, but the best that I can describe it is kind of magic, which has to do with, I think, that the moment when you actually find out that you are not alone with your worries, struggles, and whatever there is on your mind. They may seem very personal, very individual. They are, yet they're not, because there are often it's kind of a shared experience in being a man. So this is kind of the inside perspective on that whole idea behind. And with Fulfilled Man, I have the vision that we create a space, a movement, a community of like-minded men that want to grow together in a way to a more authentic version of themselves. Because I'm sure you mentioned like cultural background or personal experience in the past and so on. I'm sure that when an individual, or if it's a man or a woman, it doesn't really matter. But if you find a way to find yourself within and connect to yourself, to your heart, to what is actually really important for you, it's not only more healthy for yourself, but it's also more healthy for your surrounding. And so my greater vision behind that is really that, we can find a more healthy version of what is it actually to be a man. Because I would say that a lot of ideas and unquestioned patterns and maybe even unconscious behavior is really outdated. And I think what we are missing, especially if I don't know, look in a more general way on what is going on out there, is a lot of things, but it's also a role model. It's also a community. It's also someone we can kind of connect to, work together, grow together, and really creating an idea. What does it mean to be a man, and what does it mean to be authentically me? So I think this gives a first idea around that.
That's awesome. And it's a really good description of what the show is about, and what depths you have to go to as a man in order to be able to reach that inner version of yourself. A lot of people think when they go to men's groups or they think of men communicating in some way, it's usually around sports. But the essence of what you guys do is communicating in a different way, on a different level. And it's usually on a soft kind of Zoom call in a very, very team-like environment, supporting one another, but there's no sports. You're actually focusing. I guess the sport is the conversation in itself and how you have that. So, I imagine you're all sitting there with your cups of tea on Zoom and going deep into your emotions. But I'm guessing that's just a pure guess. I've not been in a men's circle before. I doubt I ever will be in one anytime soon, if the lockdown's going the way it is. But thank you very much for your description. I really appreciate it. We're going to jump on to Oren next. And Oren, do you want to give us a little bit of a background of who you are? And thank you very much for being here.
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join you in this conversation. I think it's an important conversation. I joined, I know Sasha through the men's group that you mentioned earlier. So we've been doing that for about a year now. And it is a powerful space to explore things that we don't usually talking about, particularly among men. I'm based in Stockholm. I lived in New York prior, and I sort of moved around quite a bit over the years. I'm a coach. I work primarily with social entrepreneurs and activists and other change makers on personal well-being. So I have lots of conversations with men and women about identity and about what it means to be authentic and what it means to be clear about what's important and to show up in the world in a way that is real and genuine to who you really are. And so I think that toxic masculinity sort of has a real corrosive effect on how we are expected to show up, and the difference between that and how we want to show up. And so any chance to sort of speak to these issues, I think, is important, because I've got two young boys and they are growing up in a society in which these roles are defined without us really being aware of them, right? And it's in the games that they play, it's on TV, it's on radio, it's in the interactions, it's with grandparents, it's everything, right? And a lot of the stereotypes and expectations are perpetuated in a way that we're not even aware of a lot of the times. And so I do it in my work, and then in my private life as well. I'm very keen on sort of exploring and examining what it means to be a man, and how that affects how I show up and how I want to show up. So I'm glad to be here with some very, very thoughtful partners on this.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much. And as I said before, I've got a feeling this is going to be one of many conversations that we're going to have moving forward.
I hope so.
I like the energy. You're both very, I know Sasha already, but you guys seem very open and very easy to talk to, which is the essence of a great guest. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And Matt, last but not least, we're heading over to you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your interests as well? And I believe you're also part of the group as well.
Yes, yes. So I know both Oren and Sasha through the men's group. Sasha and I actually became friends before he kicked that off. And I'm based in Berlin. I've been here about 3 years, originally from the States. Grew up in Detroit and spent many years in Colorado. The last 10 years, I've been mostly immersed in the startup world and startup ecosystems, innovation, which puts a big emphasis on what constitutes, leadership, what helps a company or an organization or a movement or anything really gather momentum. And I think within that, it's also implicated as, what does masculinity mean? But also, I think you're also seeing a lot of eyes turn on this from the viewpoint of diversity, inclusion, in terms of both in venture capital as well as within startup communities. But my interest in, masculinity predated that. I lost my father when I was 12. And I definitely noticed throughout my periods in my life, when there really were actually strong, meaningful male role models and when there weren't. But I think Oren touched on something, is that when I think of the term toxic masculinity, it's really hard to put your finger on it. Like we could certainly point to violence against women or patriarchy or diversity, inclusion, all these different metrics. But I think we can see the negative impact in all these ways, but a lot of ways, and the way it's actually implicated in our lives is often, I think, invisible. It's like an invisible kind of toxic nerve gas that you don't see it, you don't hear it, you don't smell it, but it's everywhere, and it takes you a long while. And I think you have to actually be around some other men who can actually help you weave together a sense of intuition of like, oh, like this is a learned, inherited behavior that I can unlearn, and there's another way I can be. But until you're actually able to work with other men, I think, to actually unpack it and like actually get a sense of it, you don't even realize it's there. You're just like, this is how the world is. The sky is blue, water is wet. Grass is green, and you don't even question these things. And it's I think this is why there's a lot of need for men to come together to discuss these things.
It's beautiful. Thank you for your input. So a lot of people out there would think of toxic masculinity. They think it's a touchy subject. They automatically think of a character like maybe Trump. They look at that and think, oh, maybe he's toxic masculinity. But not many people, and the way I look at it is it's largely down to ownership. So from a masculine perspective, a lot of men are into ownership in terms of owning a car, owning a house, sometimes owning their woman, owning lots of money, owning. But the way that we're looking at it today is an ownership in a different sense. It's an ownership of the parts of you that need to work on. It's an ownership of the words that you use. It's an ownership of your actions, an ownership of your emotions, an ownership of how you show up in life for yourself, for your kids, for your male relatives, for your female counterparts, for your female relatives, and also for people that you're in and around in a business sense. Me being an entrepreneur, I've been an entrepreneur for a number of years. I've had so many failed businesses, and there's a whole kind of scenario around that where there's the failure, and a lot of men touch into this, where they think that if they're too feminine or they're too mushy or they're too open about things, there's this sense of failure. But actually what I've realized in my sense is that, the more failures I've had, the more successes I've had on a personal development level. So the more business failures I've had that I've managed to own, the further I've got as, growing in it within personally. And I feel that's not exclusive to feminine, to myself as a woman. It's actually something that a lot of men could get a lot from. But like you say, being out there and, where do you go? So say if you're a footballer and you're out there and it's a very masculine environment, where do you go for the more softer conversations? There's not that many role models currently. I know that things are growing, but obviously you said you knew, I'll speak to you Matt first and we'll bounce back round. So you said you knew Sasha before Sasha had created the space for the men's group, but was that brand new to you? Was that something that you'd heard of before, something you were thinking about, or was this a fresh idea?
Yeah, actually, Sasha and I met through his wife. We knew each other from the startup world, and I think she just had a sense that we would get along. And at this point, I think I had no idea that Sasha was interested in doing men's work. and we just kind of formed a friendship. And then he said, "Hey, I'm doing this," and I was like, "Okay, I'm on board. Let's check it out." And I actually had been on my radar. I had spent time in other men's group or doing, men's work, but it hadn't been something I'd visited in a while. So it was something I was looking forward to returning to.
Mm-hmm.
And you put your finger on something there. How if you're just like, in these environments maybe where you don't feel like you have an opening to like have these conversations, I think that can be, that can be really hard. I think it took a while before I found men in my life where I felt safe enough to open up to and have these conversations. But I think it's one of those things, if you put your mind to it, I think you can have it happen, but I think it's not easy. And I think actually it's part of the toxic masculinity, right? Is that like, I don't get vulnerable. I don't open up. I also don't cultivate real vulnerable friendships that are really close to me, that really see my shadow or see my trauma or see the history of abuse in my family or any of the skeletons, right? It's all kept off stage. And I think that actually makes it hard, is that the tools you would use to kind of dismantle or help unfold or soften the shell of toxic masculinity actually prevents it from ever being revealed. I think that's the tricky part.
No, understood. And I knew I was going to come straight to you then, Oren. You nodding like, yes, I love this.
No, absolutely. No, that is so right. I think it takes, I think it takes an enormous courage to step into that vulnerable position, but in doing so, vulnerability invites vulnerability, right? And so, in my experience, having worked with dozens of men who are in, also in the startup world or in positions of power, they're founders, they're bringing forth some initiative into the world. It's not an environment that sort of lends itself to talking about fear or shame or these types of things. And at the same time, it's amazing that if you just drop a hint of it, or you demonstrate it, or you model it, or you open up a space for anyone to talk about it, taking the first step perhaps yourself, I found men to be almost to the last one so hungry to have these conversations because they're not so readily available. And that's not everybody, of course, but I think that for anybody for whom this is already on the radar and they're already thinking about themselves and how they fit in the world and how they show up, more often than not, they will jump at an opportunity to do it. And so I would say if you are in an environment where there aren't a lot of men having these conversations or being aware or engaging, it's a safe bet to say that many, maybe even most, are thinking about, worrying about, wrestling with these issues. And if you're courageous enough and if you have that feeling, test it out and try it. And yeah, to your point about failure, it could go nowhere, but it could open up venues that you couldn't imagine, sort of having support and love and trust with others who share many of the same sort of some of these challenges or concerns or worries are universal. And having worked with people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, from different cultures, from different religions, I'm amazed at how these issues are so common, sort of through all of those lines, through all of those sort of apparent borders. And there's something just amazingly human about being a man, and I'm sure the same is true for being a woman, in terms of how these issues play out. And so I would urge anyone thinking about it to kind of test it out, and otherwise come to us and start a conversation, because I think it's really it's really important kind of work to delve into.
Yeah. I'm going to jump straight back to Matt, and then Sasha, I'm coming to you. I've got a question for you, and I'd like some response to that. So Matt, I know you put your finger up very quickly, then did a response.
Yeah, sure. Owen triggered something that, I think the thing that I realized is when I was younger, and right now I'm 47, I turned 48 this year, is that I'd get this point in life where I'd be dissatisfied and I'd hit, like I say, is this it? And I think before I would I'd get pretty bummed out or like, depressed even at like, oh, this is all life has to offer. And then as I've gone on, I realized to me, it's like actually like a clue. If I'm saying like, is this it, means I'm kind of blocked somewhere, I'm feeling upper limited. And usually that has something that plugs into something that can either be worked through, either through coaching or through therapy. Mm-hmm. And it is usually some way of how I make sense of my world, how I make sense of my identity. And I think particularly as a man, often my sense of what it means to be strong or smart or capable or competent, that my masculinity is somehow implicated in that. So it's not like I think doing men's work is the only thing that can do this, but I think it often comes up in this context of where you feel blocked or limited, that for a man in today's world, I would suspect that masculinity is going to be a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Sasha, I'd like a response to what they both said from you, and then I've got another question for you.
Okay, yeah, sure. I would actually start with how Matt started by saying we became friends. I think now it's like 2.5 years ago or something. And Matt was only a colleague of Maria, of my wife now. And you can imagine our first meeting. Obviously, he's a few years older, and you could say, okay, a very impressive career. And I'm only kind of starting over in Berlin and trying to make contact and so on. And but before that actual meeting, I think something within me happened in the month or even in the year before that. I again and again kind of also questioned in a way how I can relate to men, or who do I actually want to have there. Mm-hmm. And I remember us sitting there on the bar. We had breakfast, but we sat on the bar, and so we did a little chit chat. And then I was like, "Hey Matt, do you know the 36 questions to fall in love with? Would you start the conversation by this?" And it was amazing. I mean, first of all, it was like, okay, can I actually do that? I don't know this guy. And we spent the whole day together. It was amazing. Wow. It started 10 in the morning, and actually we didn't end. So we fell in love, I would say, but we didn't end the question. I think we are with question number 17. Love that. So this is kind of how the story unfolds, and this was also towards what Oren said. Making the first step is really, in my experience, I didn't have a bad experience with that. It's really like there is so much need and so much wish for that space, for that room, for that connection, which is meaningful. Which is not only talking about, I don't know, sports and what you said in the beginning, but which is actually touching. And if you do the first step, then it's amazing what you will discover in a way. Yeah.
Oh, my second question to you was actually going to be around the first steps of creating a group like this, because essentially you're having to dip into the feminine, you're having to dip into that vulnerable space in order to create the group. And, if other men aren't necessarily emotionally as ready and available as you are at that time, it's you that tends to become the leader. Maybe when you're also in that space of like, oh, am I doing the right thing? But you're having to lead from the front, even if you don't feel fully confident in doing so, which is a very vulnerable space for anybody that's starting, whether it's a group that wants to start knitting or whether it's a group that wants to start talking about masculinity. So there's a number of things that are just, I mean, this is why I said it's going to be the first of many conversations, because my mind goes nuts on this. But a lot of, I like to think of, can you all remember Back to the Future, the film?
Sure.
So can you remember the character Biff? Yeah.
Who was Biff?
Funny that Oren and I are like both, of course we do. And Sasha's like,
I mean, I saw the movie, but I can't remember.
Okay, so Biff is the character. So there's Marty McFly, I think that's what his name is. Biff is the bully. He's the character. He's the very masculine bully that confrontation.
Yeah, now I have him.
At any opportunity, Yeah, so at any opportunity, his character is there to kind of be slightly more aggressive. It's the aggravator, it's the person, it's the bully, it's what we go against in life. You know, not everybody's been bullied, but most things as we grew up, especially at our age, you know, we've grown up in that world where that masculinity, that's how masculinity was portrayed, and that's how men needed to be. And it's very intimidating for a woman as well as also for a man. So this masculinity that's there isn't just really aggressive towards women, it's also aggressive towards other men. And there's a number of things that I think about that, you know, several areas of toxic masculinity, but I'd like to go into the one in around work, in the environment. And it's quite good you guys are on like tech startups as well, because I often say, and I've done many a motivational talk, and I'll go into companies and I just go completely as myself, completely authentic. I usually wear like hoodies and jeans and stuff. I don't dress up, and I'll go in and I'll start talking about, you know, absolute authenticity. And in a work environment, there's usually two versions of you. There's this one that's for work, and then there's the one that's at home, but you take both to work. And I always say that that's a huge problem. If you can't take your full authentic self into every room that you walk into, you're going to struggle in most rooms that you appear in. And a lot of men will take in and it's related to money, it's related to environment, it's related to success, but a lot of men will take in a version of themselves that they feel they need to be in order to succeed. And what you guys do successfully, I'm guessing from I've spoken to Charles, who's one of my besties, who's part of your group, and what you guys do is you allow that to drop, that kind of side of a man, that posturing, that kind of, oh, this is me and this is how that isn't needed when you do group talks like what you do, and kind of the you know, when you jump online, obviously now it's Zoom, but I'd like you to really explain and kind of give the viewer an explanation, or create a space in where you can say exactly what would take place when a man comes out of a work environment and comes to a space like yours. What is it they're going to expect when they go into a men's circle? What does that look like? What are they going to need to let go of in order to exist in a space like that? I don't actually know who to put this question to. Usually I'm like, I'm going to chuck it to Oren, please.
Sure. I think, well, I'd like to think that if you're showing up to a men's group, that there's a willingness there to explore and to be uncomfortable. You know, there's no crazy hazing. There's no, I mean, there may be crying, but I think this is part of the problem, is that we have this image of what a men's group is, right? And it's because a certain kind of man goes to a men's group, but real men don't, right? This notion, this outdated view of what a strong, you know, man who doesn't show emotion and blah, 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 right? We know that stereotype. What you get when you go to one of these groups or like ours is you have people who don't define themselves by that other image, the two that you spoke about. And, you know, I don't know, you know, for the 11 of us in the group, I didn't really know what they did or much about their histories. And if I went for a beer with them, maybe I would be interested, but it doesn't matter in that way. Like I don't know how much money they make. I don't know how many women they slept with. Like that, those types of metrics just don't matter in these types of settings where you show up and there's freedom to be just exactly who you are. And that's not like a wimpy crying, although if that's what you want to be and there's room for that as well, then absolutely. And so it's just a space to kind of explore. It didn't happen on the first time, right? These things take time and you build relationships and trust. And I think over the course of time, you realize that these are men who share the same concerns or worries or fears, and they've got your back in the sense that you can bring it. And in fact, in our group, on the third session, I think it was, somebody raised a really, really sensitive issue from his past and was extremely vulnerable and open. And for me, that shifted the entire nature of the group, because once he went there, the rest of us not only supported him, but in subsequent sessions, you could just see how much more quickly we were willing to open up and test out ideas or experiences and just to be authentic about it. And so it's to both to Sasha and Matt's point is that there's a whole world out there. And I'm still, every time I do this and every time I have conversations with these guys in groups or individually, I sort of always come back inspired and energized. Like, wow, there's so many of those areas, those dark corners that I feel more empowered and a little bit more courageous to explore, because I know I'm not alone. And that if I've got questions or if I've got worries, I have folks who can support me in that journey. So it's amazing. It's amazing in that sense.
Thank you. And Sasha, you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, and I'd like to add one point to what you were saying in introducing this question also, because this element of toxic masculinity that I see and that I also address very much is that it's actually very toxic for the individual. So it's toxic inside. Of course, it's toxic outside. It's toxic for everyone who is around. You're speaking about bullying, but if you look into, what was his name, Biff? If you look inside of Biff, if you look inside of Biff, I mean, he must be super miserable. I mean, obviously he's missing a friend who he can have honest conversations with, who he feels he can be who he is, who he can actually be vulnerable with. I mean, if he would have such a friend, Biff would change and Biff would be a different Biff. Right? Yeah. And I think this is one thing that I wanted to add. And I think this is also then relating to what Orange just said, that it is actually a process. Trust plays a big role, and of course you will not jump in and go super deep from the first circle, from the first call. It's always like, it's like with every social interaction. First you kind of see who is there, you observe, you kind of find the right balance for how fast you want to go in. I think it helps that in facilitating these circles, that you actually, as a facilitator, can be very vulnerable and lead in that way authentically. That's an important part. But yeah, and then if you realize in that circle and in that process that shit, actually, you know, they have the same issues or same but different, and it's so beautiful to see how this change can happen in the individual, and you observe that. Of course, you want to have a bite of that, and then yourself jumping in. So I think it's also kind of a chain reaction in a way that can happen.
Beautiful, thank you. Matt, would you like to add anything else before I have my next question for you to what those guys have said?
Sure. I think the only thing that came to mind is that I would say that if there's someone listening and a guy who wants to get into doing men's work, I would say it comes in all sorts of different varieties, right? And I think just as if you were seeking out a coach or a therapist, I would kind of ask around and like find something that really suits you. And then just if you experience someone who doesn't really feel like it's a good space for you, don't give up on it. There's, I think that there's a pretty wide breadth to the men's work that's being done now, and it comes in different kind of flavors or archetypes and ways that it's facilitated. So that would just be my words of advice there.
So that kind of leads on to another question, because I have quite a lot of people when they watch the show, or even just people that know me and reach out and they say, how did you get into all of this stuff, Nat? How did you end up having these conversations with these people? Where do you get these topics from? Like you asked me before. And a lot of, a lot of my time I spent reading books. I spent a number of years, you know, most people call me like a spiritual librarian. I've got a book recommendation for everyone I meet. It's crazy. And I love finding, you know, these different topics. And for me, I never used to like reading when I was younger. So a lot of people go, oh, I don't read, or I'm not into that, or, you know, might like audiobooks. But a lot of people, a lot of guys, not all of them, but a lot of guys don't read. And I never used to like reading until you know, one of my first books that I really read that really changed the game for me, it was a self-help book. And I was like, oh my, and I saw myself in the book. I saw where I'd been going wrong. You never get angry at an author. You just never do. You just, you know, they're the person that can tell you anything. And you're like, oh my God, yeah, maybe I need to work on that. So for me personally, I got a lot of my interest from books, and then I started, you know, worming my way through Amazon. And, you know, I've learned so much. But before you found Sasha and had these conversations, you said you'd kind of dipped your toes in before to this kind of area. Is there certain places that you would recommend men watching this to go and kind of read about, or go and learn about, or go and watch certain things that maybe would give them an idea just to dip their toe in the water? Is there places out there that you could recommend that would be useful for people to kind of start with? Oh, Matt on that one, I think.
You said over to me? Did you?
Yes. If you.
Okay. It's one of the first things I think of, and this is something I guess Sasha needs to write a book. Is that when you go to the bookstore, whether it's the virtual, online, Amazon bookstore, or the in real life bookstore, you know, the women's I think section is huge, right? And I think there are some new books that pop to mind, and there's some classic ones, right? Like King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, or Fire in the Belly, No More Mr. Nice Guy. There are a few books that jump out, but I don't know if those have always been what's driven me the most. I don't know. I can certainly suggest, and we could also post some stuff afterwards, but nothing's jumping up immediately for me in terms of super essential. I think for me, it's been actual doing either like one-on-one conversations or workshops, things that are more process oriented and in real life.
Nice. A lot of people would go to, you know, I think a lot of people find a therapist when they need it the most. We don't really have them until we have some kind of breakdown. But I'm guessing, you know, quite a few men, when they have relationships, I don't know how many I know Sasha, you're in relationship. Oren, I'm guessing you are. You said you had kids. Could be wrong. Matt, are you in relationship as well?
I am, yes.
Yeah. So a lot of men, you know, the emotions come up for them when they're in relationship to other people, when they have something they care around and they maybe need to improve a little bit, or maybe they need a little bit more softer. How has your relationships affected your depth of your men's work and your need for that? Was it something that you were already interested in before you were in your current relationships, or has it helped you to define the ones that you're in? Oren, I'm going to start with you if you can.
Sure. No, I think I'm reflecting on the conversation that you had with Sasha and Charles and others on conscious relationships, and I think that it started there for me, just in terms of over the years in my relationship, having a greater and greater desire to become more aware or conscious of myself in the relationship, and myself in the world, and that began an exploration, not necessarily into masculinity, but into vulnerability. So Brene Brown and a lot of the work that she was done, and the fact that it was mainstream, and the fact that became what it is, was also sort of really interesting and important, in the sense of talking. A lot of the power of that is giving words or concepts to stuff that have been floating around, that I've been feeling or wanting or trying to express, and then all of a sudden there's these great frameworks and ideas that sort of help me. And so that for me was a huge entree into just the self-exploration world, and a lot of the reading has sort of grown from there, but a lot of it, I mean, lately has been just around sort of Buddhism and self-awareness and mindfulness. And that's been extraordinary because, again, it's sort of reading some of the big figures in those worlds and all of a sudden being like, yes, that's it. Now I understand what I've been trying to figure out, and just having vocabulary for some of those concepts. And some of that very much is influenced by the coaching that I do as well. So that all of those things sort of go hand in hand. But I think it was being in a very loving, supportive relationship that allowed me to begin the exploration and begin to ask the questions and to look at things that I had taken for granted. Like Matt was saying, the sky is blue and the grass is green, and saying, well, does it have to be that way? And is it that way? And do I want to continue for myself to be that way and perpetuate, whether they're masculine or feminine or whatever, just do I want to continue that narrative moving forward? Or is it time to start letting go of some of those things? And so my relationship, I think, has been a fundamental element in the safety in which I feel like, okay, I can venture into this. And then having very, very close male friendships, which I've sort of nurtured over the years without sort of consciously doing so, but looking back thinking like, oh, wow, these are the kinds of things that we talk about, right? These are real conversations. And then finding it also in men's groups and in other sort of fora where people are showing up authentically and sort of inviting or begging you to join them in that way. And so, yeah, the relationship has been a huge, huge contributor. Maybe it's the source of the origin of that journey for me, for sure.
Amazing. And Sasha, what about you? I've met your beautiful partner, and you have a great relationship, and you did join me on the show last time as well, talking about conscious relationships. But just for the benefit of those who didn't watch that or that haven't seen it, I'd love you to kind of go into the effect that your men's work, obviously facilitating and being part of your men's work, has had an effect on your relationship, and how that kind of stemmed for you.
Yeah, I would also maybe turn it around in a way that also, I guess, one big element of that man's work for me also in the center is vulnerability. And I had the chance, actually, I would say it was only with Maria that I started to act actually vulnerable and to see the beauty in it. In very little teeny tiny steps, but opening up more and more, and realizing, how beautiful the world can be together in a way. Because I think for the 30 years before that, and for the relationships I had, I've never had that. It's actually also an interesting part, because I think when we're talking about the topic, it's also about the realization. So it takes a certain, I don't know, developmental step or kind of stepping into in a different consciousness. I don't know. But I would say for the most of my life, I was completely not aware that there could be a different way than just kind of being strong and holding in. Mm-hmm. Really, and then I think for me it was, before I met Maria, going through kind of different coachings, making different coaching certificates, being in different workshop environments, not necessarily only with men, also in mixed groups, but where I actually kind of got to know vulnerability and the power of it, and then really bringing it into the relationship with Maria, and there definitely. Seeing the effects and seeing the beauty that comes with it. So that's really elementary for me. And on the other hand, I would say also kind of then being more in a more conscious space with men and creating and nurturing that space. Also adds something to the relationship, because I think a lot of times, this is the experience I made personally, but also that kind of around me and with the people I work, we interpret a lot in our partners. We want a lot from our partners. And we want often so much from our partners that they really can't offer. And you know, I love Maria and I love our relationship, yet it's completely different if I have an honest and deep conversation with Matt or with Oren. It's a different energy, it's a different setting. I get something different out of it. And this enriches me. And with this enriched energy and state, obviously I can be very different in our relationship, because I don't need to have everything from Maria. I can get things from somewhere else, and especially also from men around me. And this is very powerful. I think this is something that kind of is interesting when you start that work and when you start that deep relationship with men, that you realize it's very different. Because I think a lot of men start probably having that space in their relationship and obviously hopefully opening up in that space, but it's a complete different level if you do that, not only in your relationship, but if you start doing that with men. It adds to the experience.
Yeah, it adds to the richness of life. Go on, Oren, just before we jump over to Matt, go for it.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Matt, I just I'm aware that there's another side of the story as well, which is, it's sort of a cautionary tale, or it's worth remembering that I think oftentimes we equate, whether we're aware of it or not, we equate vulnerability with weakness. And in relationships, that can be difficult. And Matt and I have spoken about sort of on the spectrum of masculinity and femininity and where you land and the context and the relationship. And it can be difficult, particularly if it's new, sort of going into vulnerability or being exposed and being open, because there are expectations for the partner as well, in terms of being decisive or being strong or being even aggressive as a positive thing. And men, the expectations around the roles that men should play. And yeah, it's okay to be vulnerable to a point, as long as, right? And that's why that's a dynamic.
Not too nice.
I think, no, exactly. Where, you know, every couple has to negotiate that and sort of figure out where it is, and it changes and it's dynamic. But I think it's just sort of as a counter to, you know, all vulnerability, all good, to say, you know, there are ways to talk about it and there are ways to relate to it. And there, again, to Matt's point about this stuff is invisible, that there, you know, there are reactions to vulnerability that people may not be aware of, that they're acting into, that can be harmful or undermine relationships as well. And so it's not to say don't be vulnerable, but it's not just open the gates and go. It's sort of be aware and take it slowly and have open, meaningful conversations about it as you do it, both ways.
That's a very good, valid point. I'm glad I let you in there. Go for it then, Matt, if you want to continue that from your perspective of having your, you know, your work within your relationship, and then anything you'd like to bounce back from what the guys have said as well.
Sure. I think the one thing that what Oren just said is sage advice. I think if you're really going to embark on some deep work, whether that's just, you know, therapy or coaching or men's work, there is the potential for it to be very disruptive of the status quo. And that you might find that you end up having to reinvent your relationships, whether those are professional relationships, intimate relationships, and that, I think that's good to maybe not just paint a rosy picture of it, like you get vulnerable and you learn some things, but, you know, shit might fall apart, you know, like, because, you know, sometimes things have to fall apart in order to reorganize at a higher level, right? The system has to kind of go into entropy before it can reorganize. And that takes some support and some patience and maybe some tears as well. For me, it's really clear that, you know, my relationships, you know, have fueled my interest in my self-work and my self-growth. I've certainly have hit a lot of walls, or like come out of relationships being like, what happened? Like, how did I end up here? And then I'm very happy with the partnership I'm in, And it's very clear to me that I couldn't be in the current relationship I'm in without the work I had done previously. And I think one thing is really different about the current relationship I'm in is that I think a lot of times I would find myself drawn to men's work or therapy or coaching because things are broken and they're not working. And then now I see myself getting into these places where I feel really, at my growth edge or pushed a bit. And I don't look at that being a bad thing. And then I'm able to like ask, the men in my life or, go to therapy or work with other tools while I'm inside the container of the relationship. And I have someone who supports me in that. And I very much feel that the partnership I'm in benefits by this work and is encouraged by, it's very symbiotic. They work together.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love how it's been a really easy, simple, flowing conversation, and you're all very grounded in your own positions, in your, in your relationships. And from what I've, very new to this in terms of you guys talking to me about your relationships. I've not met you before, but there's a quality of the conversation that I believe that all of you guys have touched on today, and it's a deeper understanding. And there's something I wanted to touch on, and I think it's something it's important to touch on in the sense of there's so many women out there, beautiful and amazing as we are. There is a lot of work to be done on the acceptance of an empowered man. And there's not many of them walking around, that we see. So we therefore judge and say, oh, if only you could be like this person. So we want every man to be like the empowered man. But what that takes is an awful lot of acceptance and vulnerability from a woman. So in order for most women to allow an empowered man into their space, they too have to be empowered. They too have to be going into depths of vulnerability. They too have to be open and willing to go there and to do the work, which is, I think I think from what I've seen, having been in and out of different communities for a long time, there's a lot of women out there that are doing very deep, emotional, and I'll call it orgasmic self-work. They go down to the sexual chakra, they're releasing trauma, they're releasing all these different things, they're breaking down their own vulnerabilities, and they're trying to get to a more authentic space within themselves. But a lot of women can hold on to this anger for men because of how they may have been treated in the past. And sometimes when they do meet an empowered person, it's very difficult for them to resonate with that because there's a lack of trust. There's, they may have not worked on themselves to the level to be able to meet the man. And I think that's happening a lot now, where there's a quality of a man out there is something that a lot of people are looking for, but it's asking both sexes to step up. I think there's a lot of that stuff out there where people are saying, oh, men need to step up, men need to do more. And I find that quite harsh. I've read a lot of the book. Unfortunately, I went through quite a horrific relationship when I was younger. And for a number of scenarios that worked out for me, I had to go through and work out why those had happened. And I've talked about it before on the show. I'm not ashamed to say it. There was rape, there was anger, there was abuse. And in order for me to get through that and to find my own forgiveness for that situation for myself and for him, I learned to read way more. And I went in on the books that I was reading, and I was blown away by the amount of information I started to understand about why men do what they do. And it helped me to see men in a different light. If I hadn't have read that literature, the books that you mentioned are all of the ones that I've read, and also The Way of the Superior Man and A Conscious Man and a whole of quite a few others. And I got addicted almost to reading these books and watching these things online, because it was a side of men I'd never seen. And I think a lot of people out there don't see the history that men have gone through, the vulnerabilities that they've gone through as children. They look at the man, they don't look at the man as a boy. And if they do, they look at it from a patronizing point of view, not from oh my God, this was just a young boy at one point and he got hurt too. So there's a real shift, I believe, in the way that we have these conversations, and the way that we come to them as women is not with blame. It's not with our 16 years worth of trauma and, hey, here you go, I want to meet a new guy, but this is what I've got to deal with. It's about an equal setting, but also there's this danger that we try and be too equal. We try and be the perfect balance. And a lot of that is not allowing a man to be his full masculine self or to be his feminine self. And a man not allowing a woman to be her masculine self or her feminine self. So there's this dance, I think you'll all have experienced it, where you all have to change those roles, those gender roles, over the course of your relationship, which is very difficult for a lot of people to do because they don't understand the energy and the balance that creates until you fully really understand yourself and you know what you're putting in. So I wanted to be really clear about that this isn't a bash against men, or, you know, like you said, Oren, about, you know, men being vulnerable, it's all amazing. It's not. It requires a lot. There's so much work there to be done. But before we kind of wrap up for today, I just wanted to kind of end on a mutual question for all of you, if you can answer it in your different ways as well. I think we've lost Oren. His signal might have gone, but if he jumps back in, I'll bring him back on. Or he's just exited. He didn't want to answer the last question. There we go. He's back, I believe. There you go. You ran away. I promise that question's not going to be that. It's not going to be that hard. It's good. I would love it if you could give 3 top things that you feel, and I'd like you, because a lot of this audience is going to go out to younger people in the music industry. It's going to go out as I'm growing my channel. A lot of the networks I have are related to younger men. And I'd love it if you could pretend that you never knew anything about men's work, but you know what you know now. And if you could come from a different perspective of, at the very beginning, what 3 things would you advise someone to do that hadn't really tapped into the men's work on the levels that you have, that can start with, you know, 3 simple places they can come from where they can maybe find a little bit of light in that tunnel? I would love to chuck it. Matt, I'll chuck it to you first if you can. 3 things that somebody could find in the beginning or look for.
All right. Okay. Yeah, I think one, if you haven't done therapy, do some therapy. I don't think anyone really gets through this life unscathed, even if you come from relatively secure, you know, successful, however you want to say it, family or background. I'd say if you haven't done some therapy, do some therapy. I think that can be a doorway in a safe environment to start working with vulnerability. The second piece, which has been very personal to me, is explore mindfulness, explore meditation, and just give you another tool to really work with felt, embodied, emotional experience, and better to work with that. And then finally, really do an evaluation of what's been, if you look at your course of your life, whether you're in your 20s or in your 30s, whatever, look through your life and think about what have been my friendship circles, and how vulnerable could I be with those people in my life, and kind of map it out. Like, how many people could I call? My friend used to call this the, if I'm stuck in a foreign country and I'm in a jail, like, who can I call and I know they'll come and get me? Mm-hmm. Some people say it's the call at 4 a.m. or the, someone to let me crash on their couch for a few weeks. Where it's like someone's really there for you, and really map out, like, who's really got my back. And then like, how do those people identify? How many of them identify as men? And I think those are 3 things I would look at just to get a basic kind of framework of where am I today, and what can I work with.
I love that. Thank you. That was a really good basis to start on. Sasha, go for it. 3 things that you think would be good place to start.
I need to say, it's really challenging, this question for me, because it's not an easy one to answer. But I would maybe kind of connect to what Matt said in the end with the friends, or like, who is there in your life. It really makes a difference with who you spend your time with. So really kind of, thinking about who is there, and is that, I don't know, is this enough, or is there maybe, like, is there more potential? And then also kind of thinking about what else could be interesting, what else am I curious about? So I would say it's not so much about kind of going fast forward to do work or men's work. It's really kind of growing your own mind and heart in a way, and I think the people around you have a lot to do with that. and I would say for me, my way was really kind of starting with coaching certificates, and this was kind of the first step into, okay, you actually can look differently or see different perspectives. So there is not one reality, but there are different ways you can look at things. And oh wow.
Yeah, I know,
this is a different reality.
Yeah, I was going to get 6 answers from him then, but
The doppelganger was here.
More awesome people. We have more awesome people. Yeah, and then yeah, probably also in that way, like go where it feels uncomfortable. Because this might be an interesting path to go.
Yeah,
it's definitely out of your comfort zone.
Very much so. Thank you.
I don't know how satisfied I am with my answers, but really, it's challenging one.
No, it's good. Not everybody has the answers for everything when I ask these, and I love it because it there's a depth in thinking about that, and that matters. You really are trying to think of the right answer, which is good, and that's what I appreciate. So this is why it's good when it's live. Otherwise, you'll be like, Nat, can we edit that out? And the answer is no. It's live.
Damn it.
And then, Oren, before you disappear or turn into 3 people, what's your 3 answers? What's the top 3 things?
I'm sorry about that. I'm sitting here in Stockholm where the internet should be reliable. So I have no idea what Matt or Sasha said. So if I'm repeating, apologies. I think that for me, mindfulness has been really sort of an amazing self-discovery or pathway. And I'm happy to put up a couple of things that I found particularly useful, just to kind of be aware of what I could be aware of. And sort of, it spoke to me in a way that for somebody who is looking for language and concepts to explain, everyday type things, I found very powerful. And related to that, of course, very closely is meditation. So creating the time to just sit and observe and, see what comes up. I think that is invaluable part of that experience. So that's 1 or 2. I would, as I said earlier, I suspect most people have someone or someones in their network that they can begin a conversation with if they dared to take the first step. It doesn't even have to be a man, actually. It could be a family member, it could be friends, it could be a mentor, it could be a teacher, it could be someone who they just sort of feel that there's some kind of a connection. And as such, as I think we've all said, that more often than not really has the opportunity to open doors, not close them. And so that's a second one. I think the core for me in all of this is vulnerability and getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. And so, read or watch or podcast Brene Brown, pretty much anything on that. She will. Yeah. Some of it can be really, really powerful, just again, to kind of name it. And there's something liberating in knowing that I'm not alone in this, whatever that version is. So those are 3 different places that I would start.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. It's been great. Considering I didn't know you 2 before, I feel like, oh yeah, I got 2 new friends. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I love it. And I'd love to go into a conversation around the tech world and around the kind of approach to startups from a masculine perspective, and kind of how that is. Being an entrepreneur myself, I know, I've lived in my masculine energy for a long time. So getting into my feminine has been really tricky for me, just thinking, oh, it's okay to be vulnerable and not to know everything. And also not to try and prove yourself all the time. There's really no joy in that. But for those of you who've made comments, thank you so much. I haven't had time to read them all out today. I really appreciate it. For anybody that is watching at home, I would say if you close your eyes and you literally just sit with yourself and you switch your phone off, you switch off the music, you shut down Netflix, close your eyes, and you feel and you ask yourself the simple question, what is it I really need? the answer is probably going to be depth. You need to go a little bit deeper. You need to go a little bit stronger on what you're looking for, and make time for it. I think that's the most important thing. There's so much time on our hands right now, unfortunately, in so many weird ways, but they are also wonderful as well. And it's, you know, you can always drop in here every night at 7 o'clock. I'm here having a talkward of some kind. So if you're looking for more of the deeper conversations, there's plenty more to come. Specifically, I have one tomorrow with the famous music singer Frank Turner, who is also bringing on one of his friends who's called Mashpee, who is a child soldier or a previous child soldier. And he's now a musician. And the depth that this guy's gone through just by his life circumstances alone is going to really bring you into your heart and make you realize there's a whole other world out there. So for now, thank you so much for everyone joining us. We'll see you tomorrow at 7 o'clock. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. If you can like the video, I'll be very happy. And if you want to reach out to any of these three, underneath on the description is their LinkedIn information. I'm sure they'll be happy to have any conversations with you. And we will see you all next time. If you guys can stay there for a moment, but everybody else at home, thank you so much. Enjoy your evening. Stay safe, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye-bye.